Welcome to Harper Halfling, where we talk about Lord of the Rings and a little bit about D&D. So let's get to it. This week we are starting chapter 1 of the history of the Silmarils. So now we're actually into the story of the Silmarils. And this chapter is called Of the Beginning of Days. So there will be new terms and new names, and all of that will be left down in the description for you guys as we kind of go along. So at first, Melkor has the upper hand, and he is gaining more and more of Arda. And then Tulkas comes to help the Valar. It says, hearing in the far heaven that there was battle in the little kingdom, Arda was filled with the sound of his laughter. So Melkor ends up fleeing from Tulkas's wrath and laughter. And Tulkas stays in Arda. He's the last Valar to join the group. And because of this, Melkor stays away, and now Melkor hates Tulkas. This begins the Spring of Arda, so everything is now starting to actually be created. The Valar are trying to repair and bring order back to Arda, or I guess not back to, but bring order to Arda. They calm the oceans, they create the shores, and Yavanna now starts planting her seeds. And in this process, they have buried all of the fire on Arda into the ground. So now there's no light source outside of Varda's stars. And so Yavanna goes to her husband, Ilúin, and asks him to build a lamp, which he does. And he builds these lamps, 2 lamps, and Varda fills them with her starlight. Manwe blesses them, and then these 2 lamps are going to be created to light up all of Middle-earth. So the Valar placed them on these really high pillars. It says higher than any mountains on Earth. One lamp was at the north end of Middle-earth, and this one was called Illuin, and the other at the south end, and this one was called Ormal, so that the world had endless light. So at this point, there is no like night and day. It's just all one constant light source. And because there is a lamp at either end of Middle-earth, there is a point where the lights kind of blend, and it's a little dimmer there. But outside of that, this is all one constant light. So now the seeds that Yavanna have planted begin to grow, and from here we get moss, grass, and large trees. And it says animals begin to start roaming, but no birds. It's very specific that there are no birds and no flowers yet, that it is not their time. So where the lamps meet, or the lights meet, that middle ground, there was an island called Almaren. And this is where the Valar first dwelled. So before they move to Aman or Valinor, they live on a little island called Almaren. So now this is their time of rest, where they're kind of like, okay, everything's built. This feels really good. Now we can kind of relax. And so Manwe's like, let's throw a party. Let's have a feast. Like, let's enjoy this time. And Ilúvatar and Tulkas are not all for it, because they've been doing the majority of the work, like the really big stuff. Ilúvatar is obviously making everything, and Tulkas is keeping Melkor at bay. So they're really drained and they're tired, and they know, or they have an idea that Melkor knows this and will take advantage of the situation. But Manwe is like, nah, whatever, it's totally fine, we're gonna throw a party. And he's like, hey, Tulkas and Nessa, you guys are going to get married. We're gonna have a wedding for you guys. That's what we're gonna do. And so Tulkas is like, okay. What Ilúvatar and Tulkas, though, their ideas that Melkor does know was true. He did know. There were spies. He had spies among the Valar, and at this moment was watching Almaren, biding his time. So right now we have the Maiar, and those are kind of his spies. But nevertheless, Manwe is like, no, we're going to throw this wedding. And so everyone's happy, and everybody thinks everything's fine. There's no big deal. Nessa starts dancing for everybody, doing her thing. And Tulkas falls asleep. He falls asleep content and just tired. and Melkor sees his chance. So he sneaks in, and it says that the Valar are covered with Illuin's light, and so they never notice it. They never notice Melkor's shadow growing closer. So like, it kind of sounds like Melkor is just darkness, but they're kind of in all the light, and so they can't see anything. I kind of read that as like, if you've ever been on stage and you have the big blinding spotlights on you, it's really hard to see anything outside of those blinding lights. And I kind of got that impression, like they literally could not see him. And I think they were also just blinded by their own, like, thinking everything's cool and fine. They're just their own naivete, I guess, that they didn't even notice that Melkor was getting closer. But he did. He saw Tulkas fall asleep, saw his chance, took it. And so he hides beneath the mountains where the light of Illuin is dim, and he begins to build his fortress Utumno. And nobody really knows that Melkor is present. Like, Melkor has made a spot in Middle Earth, that he's doing his thing. And so his fortress starts growing, his power starts growing. And let's see, even though they can't see, or even though they don't know that Melkor's there and Utumno's there, his hatred begins to show in Middle Earth. It says that beasts start becoming monsters, forests start becoming perilous, like they start becoming very haunted looking. Rivers basically become swamps. They're filled with just slime and weeds. Plants start becoming poisonous. And the greenery, all the trees and the plants start to wither and rot. And so now the Valar are starting to look for Melkor, because now they recognize his hatred. The only problem is that he's been here for a while, and he knows that they're looking for him now. So he makes the first move. He attacks first, because he was ready. He's been building this whole time and growing. So he throws his first attack, and he takes out the lamps of the Valar, and this causes absolute chaos. The seas began to cause damage again, and the flames from the lamps destroy everything. It says the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. So he's just destroyed everything that they've created very quickly. And in the chaos, Melkor leaves. He runs away. He escapes. But he is scared, because even though there's all this chaos, I mean, think about it. If you've ever been to the ocean, like, the crashing of waves is so loud. If you ever heard explosions, like, those are so loud. But above all of that chaos, Melkor could hear Manwe and like yelling at him. And it says that Tulkas, that was like basically going after Melkor, and so Melkor could feel the earth shaking from Tulkas coming after him. So Melkor is just like, oh crap, I messed up. So he bails. He gets out of there as fast as he can, and he hides in Utumno, and nobody knows where Utumno is, and so he gets away. He's free. But he stays low for some time. He's scared. And so the Valar, since they don't know where Melkor is, they use all of their strength to rebuild and prepare for the firstborn, for the elves. And they're worried because they don't know when the firstborn will arrive, and they still have the threat of Melkor the whole time. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, they know the firstborn or that the children of Ilúvatar are going to at some point arrive on Arda, but even though they had that long vision of the making of Arda and all the history, they don't know the exact time that the children of Ilúvatar will arrive. So that's kind of always a looming thought in the back of their minds. So now the Valar have to move. They can't, Almaren is completely destroyed, and so they have to find a new place to dwell. And so the Valar moved to Aman, or Valinor, and there, and this is at the west. To the west of Valinor is the outer sea, which no one knows how wide that sea is except for the Valar. And after that is the walls of the night, is what it says. On the east of Valinor is the end of Belegaer, the great sea of the west. So I had to do a little bit of research on this part, and it makes sense with this, and so it all lines up. But at the beginning, Arda is a flat world. So if you think there's Middle Earth, and then Almaren was in like the middle of Middle Earth, and then you have Aman or Valinor over here, then the walls of the night is like space. So you have the ocean and then space. So but because of the threat of Melkor, the Valar raised the Pelori mountains of Aman. So these mountains are highest on Arda, and on the highest summit sits Manwe's throne, and the elves call this point Taniquetil, and a bunch of other names, but we're going to call it Taniquetil because that's what it's most commonly referred to. From this point is where Manwe and Varda can see and hear all like to the furthest east of Arda. So basically Valinor is now become this fortress. So you have Middle Earth, you have an ocean, you have mountains, you have Valinor, you have a big ocean, and then you have space. So they're trying their best to get as far away from Melkor as possible, which was confusing to me because it's like, aren't you guys supposed to be preparing Middle Earth? But we'll get there. So Valinor now holds all that was saved from Melkor's destruction. So what they could salvage is now brought to Valinor, and then they create new things there. So now Valinor becomes kind of like a paradise. Like there's no blemishes, nothing can really die here, and it's perfection. And it says that it's even more beautiful than Middle Earth in the Spring of Arda. So before Melkor destroyed everything, like Valinor is more beautiful than that was. And so now Valinor is made, everyone has a dwelling, and they make Valmar, which is the city of the Valar. And here we start seeing the trees of Valinor. So it says at Valmas, which is the western gate of Valmar. All of this will be down below. There was a green mound called Ezellohar, and on this mound, Yavanna blessed it. And here it says that she sat and sang a song of power, in which was said all her thought of things that grow in the earth. And Nienna sat with Yavanna and watered the mound with her tears. And the rest of the Valar were at council in the Mahanaxar, which is the Ring of Doom near the Golden Gates. And they just watched and listened to Yavanna. It says that there were no other sounds in all of the world except for Yavanna singing. And from her singing and from the tears of Nienna grow the Two Trees of Valinor. And this is what Yavanna is most well known for. One is called Laurelin, and it's essentially daylight. And the other one is Telperion. This one's called starlight. I'm just going to read their description right quick. Let's see. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were a shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new open beech. Their edges were of glittering gold, Flowers swung upon her branches, and clusters of yellow flame formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. From the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Telperion, the one, was called in Valinor, and Silpion and Ninquilote, and many other names. But Laurelin, the other, was, and Malinalda and Kulurian, and many names and song beside. So you have one that's essentially daylight and one that's night, starlight or nighttime. And from these trees, each glows for 7 hours, with them overlapping for 1 hour. So their day only has 12 hours. And this begins the counting of time, or the count of time, and the bliss of Valinor. From the light of the trees, Varda stored the dew into lakes and were like wells of water and light. So the dew drops that came from the trees she gathered. And so now you have like glowing water and wells. Going back to Middle-earth, Middle-earth only has the stars. And so Melkor is still running amok and doing his thing, and no one seems to care. The Valar at this point very seldom go to Middle-earth. There are a few Valar that still try to go, but not too often. I think, let me double check, but I believe that Yavanna actually is one that tries to go back to Middle-earth and check on it constantly. And she's encouraging the Valar to be like, hey, Melkor's still over there. We still need to get the world prepared. What are we doing here? But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of going back and forth. So now at this point, the chapter goes into like the gifts of that the Valar are giving to elves later on. Ilúin brought lore and knowledge to Middle-earth of making and crafting or just the understanding of making and crafting, but of knowledge of things that come from Yavanna. So as far as like crafting and making and building, what the elves understand, that came from Ilúin. But anything about growing plants and gardening, I guess, comes from Yavanna. It continues on to say that Ilúin is friend of the Noldor, one of the Eldars, and they are the most skilled elves and are the first to use or even make gems, with the fairest being the Silmarils. Next, we have that Ilúvatar gave the Noldor a gift of knowledge, and they added to their gift by learning more languages, or creating languages, writing, embroidering, drawing, carving, and then, of course, making gems. Manwe, he never forgot about Melkor. He was constantly thinking about it and was sitting at Taniquetil searching for Melkor, and he sent Maiar spirits that were in the form of hawks and eagles to continue their search for Melkor and for Utumno, but they never found anything, or as of yet they haven't found anything. Manwe loves the Valar, one of the other Eldars, the most, and he gave them song and poetry, which poetry was one of his delights. Ulmo favored the Pelori, the last of the Eldars, and their music has sadness and enchantment. It says that Ulmo's, one of the Maiar that serve Ulmo, Salmar, made Ulmo's horn, Illumari, and then Osain and Uinen were also his servants or his helpers, and the three of them came to Arda with Ulmo, which, if you remember, Ulmo stays in Middle-earth. He has no desire to go to Valinor unless he's absolutely needed. And by the power of Ulmo, Melkor couldn't kill Arda. Like, Ulmo's, basically the water is what saved Arda. And Ulmo never stops thinking of how to care for Middle-earth, and he hears when someone has fallen to Melkor. So if any of the Maiar are corrupted by Melkor, Ulmo is aware of that. And so now it says at this time, Yavanna comes back to Middle Earth to heal what she can. And she's continuing to tell the Valar, like, you've got to go and we have to go and fight Melkor. We have to get rid of him. We still are preparing for the children of Ilúvatar, and they're going to come, and Melkor is still going to be running amok, and it's going to be chaos, and we're going to lose the children of Ilúvatar. So she's urging the Valar to go, but they're not listening so much right now. Let's see, next we have Orome would also come at times to Middle Earth to hunt the monsters of Melkor. But still, Melkor grew stronger. He kept coming. It says that he kept coming to hunt the monsters and the Felbees, but Melkor was still corrupting everything that was left, and whatever spirits that would come by, he would corrupt them. And so, yeah, Orome's killing some, but Melkor's making more. And so there's just no, like, it's a little hard to take somebody out who's growing stronger and stronger with just one or two people. So there are some Valar that are trying to push back on Melkor, but it's something that it needs to be a group effort, and it just hasn't happened yet. Next, we start talking about specifically elves and men and what Ilúvatar had in mind for them. And so now all is said. Let me go to it. Because now they're like, okay, we're done talking about the making of Middle Earth. It says, now all is said concerning the manner of the earth and its rulers in the beginning of days. And ere the world became such as children of Ilúvatar have known it. So, like, what we just went through, that's what the children of Ilúvatar know. That's it. This chapter was, like, really... It felt all over the place to me. Which, again, this all comes from Tolkien's just notes and scribbles, so maybe that's part of it. So, like, this last section of the chapter is about Ilúvatar's gifts, like, specifically his gifts to the elves and men, and kind of a vague idea of their purpose. And it also says that the Valar are more like elders to the children of Ilúvatar and not masters, because they don't know enough to be masters of the children of Ilúvatar. And again, like, the children of Ilúvatar are made in the image of Ilúvatar, and so the Valar kind of hold them at a higher standard. This is very reminiscent to biblical theology, in that angels aren't like masters of people because we are made in the image of God, and so they're more of a helper than anything else. And that's kind of what this sounds like. Let's see. Ilúvatar made the elves more in nature to the Ainur in knowledge and even ability. But to men he gave, it says, strange gifts. So elves were given beauty and understanding of the world. Men were given freedom of their fate and time, something even the Valar envy. So the elves don't die. They are immortal creatures, and they at the end of the third age, the elves go to Valinor. They go to the Undying Lands because they're immortal. It's no longer their time now. It's now the time of men. And men are given, it says that Ilúvatar wants men to have control of their fate. He wants them to go and explore and to go find new things and to just create their own destiny, create their own fate in their own future. But part of that is that they are restricted by time, that men do eventually die. Some take longer to die than others, but they do eventually die. And this is something that even the Valar envy, that men do eventually have an end. And let's see. Oh, it does say too that while elves are more in the nature of the Ainur of the Valar, men are more akin to Melkor, of this destructive nature in them. The elves don't know where men go after they die, and they're just called strangers or guests of the world because they do eventually die, but they don't know where they go. The Valar have told elves that men will join them in the second music of the Ainur, but no one except Ilúvatar knows what happens to elves at the end of the world, not even Melkor, and it's something that I guess Melkor is kind of searching for, but no one knows what will happen to elves, and it's just kind of left as this mystery. So, and that's it. That's the end of this chapter. It was a little harder to read through than the other ones. There was like a consistent flow at the beginning of the chapter of a story. You have the making of Arda, the destruction of Middle Earth, the creation of Valinor, and kind of the Valar's escape and a little bit of cowardice, in my opinion. But they go there and make their paradise. And then you have the trees of the Valar, which gives light. That's a huge part of the first age. And then, yeah, everybody's kind of messing with Middle Earth, but not really. Melkor's still kind of doing his thing. And then we just start talking about gifts that the Valar are going to give elders, like other elves that aren't yet in the story. And then the last section is just what Ilúvatar had in mind for elves and men. I don't know. This chapter, I like the trees, like the creation of the trees. I thought that was nice. I like this image of Yavanna just pouring out everything she has into this song, this power song to create the trees, and essentially Nienna crying for Middle Earth, and that's what waters the trees. Like I like that image. It's a very beautiful, solemn image. But outside of that, this was kind of a, I don't know, this chapter just felt all over the place. And I feel like this video kind of feels all over the place. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like it as much as I enjoy reading the Silmarillion, but this was not my favorite chapter so far. But the next chapter I'm going to really enjoy, because that one's of Ilúin and Yavanna, and we get to talk about the dwarves. So, yeah, that's it for this one. This was, yeah. It wasn't quite as much fun to make for you guys, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something from it. Yeah, I don't really have too much else to say on this chapter. It's just a wild ride. On a side note, though, because of last week's video about the Valar, my husband was on Reddit, and he was reading some thread, and it mentioned Tolkien, and Jordan, or my husband, was like, "Oh, I know that guy," and I was like, "Is that because of me?" He goes, "Yeah." So that was kind of nice. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you guys are sticking around with me. I really like going through the book with you and learning more. And yeah, I just hope you guys stick around. So please like and subscribe. Let's keep this going. And yeah, may the hair on your toes never fall out. Bye.